Welcome to the International Classroom. I'm Alex Gray, your host, and today's episode is a special one, kicking off a new segment we're calling Student Voice. Now, we know school can be awesome, can be inspiring, and sometimes a little bit overwhelming too. So this is your space to be honest, to share your experiences and your ideas about education, especially as things keep changing in this world. Now, my first guest is Sam Dhesi, and he's got a fascinating story. He went from training as a medic to the tech world. Now, Sam shares his thoughts of where education fell short for him, what surprised him about the skills he uses now, and how he navigated this big shift. If you want your voice to be heard about the future of education, you won't want to miss this one. On to the episode. Thank you ever so much for joining me on what is this first section of Student Voice on the International Classroom podcast. We'll get into it in a second. Obviously, for those of you, we are a different age. Just for people out there to know, as Sam kindly alluded to, our what can I say? My youthful good looks at the age of 40. So I appreciate that to start with, Sam. Thank you. But you're here as an ex-student of mine, and you're going to kick off this segment for us because really interested in terms of your experience within the education system and obviously then having transitioned through it. So just to start us off with, what subjects did you study during your A-levels, and how do you think that kind of shaped your career path?
Sure. I think it was the other way round, actually. The career path was chosen for me. I'll get into that. And then I chose my subjects. So I did 4 AS levels. So I did the 3 sciences, physics, chemistry and biology, and then also geography. And then I dropped geography at AS and just continued with the 3 sciences for A2. And the reason I say it was the other way round is because my parents are Indian, and so I only really had one choice. And if you're getting the grades to get into medicine, then you kind of have to do it. So it was kind of already laid out in front of me, that one, sadly.
Well, you say sadly. I mean, you got the grades to get into to go and study medicine, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. Although it wasn't really what I wanted to do, which kind of manifested later on in my career. But not to say it was an amazing experience. But it wasn't really, it wasn't exactly the right thing for me personally. Yeah.
And in that sense, are you talking about the course itself, or in terms of how you felt the course prepared you for, work in the outside world?
I guess it depends on what you're going to do after medicine. So I think one of the strong things about studying medicine here in the UK is that we do produce amazing doctors. We really do. Like you come out of med school and you're super well-rounded. There's a real emphasis on not just your clinical proficiency, but the way that you're able to interact with people and patients. So if you're going to stay in medicine, then it's amazing. However, if you're going to venture out, and there is a growing cohort of doctors who are getting into hybrid careers, it doesn't really prepare you for anything outside of the medical bubble. So I actually completely defected from medicine and felt like I was starting from scratch, learning everything I needed to about the world outside of that medical bubble from the very beginning. And I really felt like I was, a few years behind some of my peers. So it just depends on, you just don't know which direction life is going to take you in, right? So it's kind of impossible to tell.
Why do you think then that is? Why did you feel so underprepared?
So I think in order to produce a doctor, you kind of you don't have much more time to teach us medical students more than medicine, really. There's a lot there to cover. So real world skills, like anything to do with business or finance, I was completely clueless about the world of finance. There's nothing about geopolitics, stuff that really influences the world, nothing. So none of that had any influence on our study whatsoever. So I think it's just a factor of there just being so much volume to learn to produce a doctor that it's kind of difficult to fit anything else in.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it would be beneficial if they looked to bring that in, or do you think that would then have an impact on the actual quality of doctor you produce?
Well, I guess it depends on what we're trying to achieve with our medical training in this country. Are we looking to produce doctors who are only going to be providing a service in the NHS, or do we want to produce doctors who are also pushing the boundaries and looking to innovate and having the tools and the skills to develop new technologies or get involved in, other parts of their communities or in education? So I get the feeling. So when I was kind of practicing as a medic, there was a real push towards just like service provision, right? There's so much clinical work to do in the hospital. We're totally overwhelmed. So the feeling really was that if the system had its way, we would be doing nothing outside of the bubble other than just treating patients. And that was it, right? But obviously we're humans and we want to do other stuff and we want to have a zest for work and life. And, people want to have some diversity in their careers. But really, you're kind of pushed into this kind of small box, and if really they could just have it their way, if the NHS could have it, in its own way, it would simply just have doctors just providing clinical output, essentially.
So taking a step back from that, obviously, think about back to your A levels. Do you find that school as a whole and the A level really as a whole prepared you for university life?
So I think my experience at school was probably quite atypical. So I didn't really have many friends actually at school, quite the contrary. So I kind of threw myself into studying when I had, and I kind of left aside all of the opportunities that we had. So we were very privileged. So it was Queen Mary's where you taught me biology, and we had so many opportunities that we could take up, which I just didn't take up. So there was a huge emphasis on sport. We had like music lessons. We had the the CCF, and all of this stuff I kind of just didn't get involved with. I was quite insular and I just focused on studying. So I think if I had taken all of those opportunities and expanded my horizons, then I think I would have been far better prepared for university. And I think a lot of the kids that QM produced were, just not me.
Yeah, it's kind of I remember the experience in itself, and you can kind of go the other way with that to some extent, in that it's sometimes possible that there's too much on offer for students, and actually then that can detract away from streamlining that process of, well, hang on a minute, we still need students to get A's and A stars to go on and produce these doctors and medics. So, and it's one of those wonderful things, isn't it? Hindsight's a great thing. You've probably heard this, in terms of look back on it, but, would you be the person you are today if you did do those things? It's an interesting one. But it kind of led you, like you say, you've gone a very different path. You've shifted from the medical profession now to more of a tech side and an entrepreneurial startup side. Like, how have you found that? So really, what inspired that shift to start with, and what are some of the challenges you've faced?
Yeah, sure. I think I was always headed that way, even at school. So I think the thing that made me, I guess, veer off in this direction is, I don't know if you remember this, but at school, we used to have, all the students used to be ranked every half term. Don't know if you remember that. So I don't know if this is like allowed anymore, right? but this is the way it was. And like from the very beginning, from year 7, I remember like half term, and then we had like everyone's rankings in the year group literally pasted at the front of the class. And that was like my first real taste of like pretty toxic competition, I've got to say. Yeah. But I just became totally obsessed with that ranking. And I remember like first half term, after the first half term in year 7, I was like 92nd out of 96 students. And then everything I did from that moment onwards was just based on this obsession of climbing up that ranking. And that fire just continued to burn. So I don't, obviously you probably don't recall, but like in the final years of school, like during A levels, there were these kind of like the 5 students who were kind of battling it out for the top 5 constantly. And there was all kinds of like psychological warfare going on. And there's some student, I remember one guy, I won't mention his name, he used to get so angry that he wasn't like consistently first and like flipping tables and all sorts. But anyway, that part of that, I think that mindset, that fire just continued to burn. And everything I did from then on was just like purely driven from a competitive standpoint. And it got to the point even with medicine where it was just like, I just felt like there was a whole world out there. You know, I was in the city that people were like doing these amazing things, and I kind of wanted to be in the mix with them and not in this like bubble that was the NHS. And so I was kind of driven to just, you know, make it out. And I didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't know what I was going to do outside of medicine. I just knew that I kind of wanted to make it work in the city and do something else. And it just so happened that one of the hardest things to do, because the world is trying to hold you back in so many ways, is to build a company, particularly a company that achieves some kind of venture scale. Everything around you is friction when you're trying to build something new and you're trying to birth something new. Like literally everything, every movement that you take is trying to stop you from like creating something new. And so naturally, because it was such a hard thing to do, I knew I could see like so many companies around like that, you know, the failure rate of startups is like 97, 98%. I kind of just wanted to give it a go and see if I could make it work. And yeah, so far, you know, maybe our chance of failure is maybe, you know, 80% at the moment, not 95. So
it's decreasing. Yeah,
exactly.
So thinking about obviously skills then and things that you've learned from this experience, like what have been some of the key takeaways from you sort of bridging that gap between obviously medicine into this world that is interesting to you, but is completely foreign? Now, it seems like sometimes schools are putting the cart before the horse and trying to write AI policies before even having a solid digital strategy in place. Now, that's where our collaborative partner, Smart Technologies, can help. They have got this fantastic free resource called the EdTech Assessment Tool. It's a quick survey that digs into where your school or district stands right now in terms of digital tech and how teachers are using it. Think of it as a way to build that strong foundation so those AI conversations make even more sense. Now, I've taken it myself and I got some great insights. So you want to see where you stand? Check out the EdTech Assessment Tool. I've got the link right in the show notes, and I've also put the QR code on screen just this side. Back to the conversation with Sam.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the greatest transferable skill, actually there's probably two transferable skills, major transferable skills between medicine and trying to give birth to a company. The first one is that it kind of depends where you trained, but I trained in a trauma center. So I did my basic medical training in a trauma center. So I was like a few months into my tenure as a junior doctor and having to deal with people who were sadly like bleeding out in front of me, and I had to do something about it. And I was the person to sort it out. And after that experience kind of repeats itself constantly to a pretty young like person, you kind of get used to just everything being total chaos around you and having no control over things, and taking control of the small things that you can take control of. That is something that does really transfer well into the startup world, because so much stuff is out of your control and you can only control so much, and you kind of have to be at peace with it. But it can go the other way. So like the flip side of that is sometimes something goes wrong, and I'm so like desensitized to things going wrong that I don't quite quantify how bad it is. Right? So it can go the other way. The other thing is, if you're somebody who like sat down and calculated what you needed to get A stars at A2, which is pretty much everyone who got straight A stars at A2 did, right? You calculate you had to get 80% at A2, then you've got to get 90% at A2, and you know exactly the scores you need to get. Then you get into medicine and you know exactly like the hoops you need to jump through to get into your surgical training program. You are somebody who knows how to game the system, right? You will use things to your advantage. You are somebody who knows how to leverage things very, very well. And again, when you're trying to build a startup, you have to leverage things to your advantage, and you have to find like unusual ways in to get in front of people, to get people's attention. So that certainly transfers too.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, it's an interesting one, because listening to you speak about obviously the development and training as a doctor, it sounds very insular. It sounds like you are to some extent isolated, yet what you've transitioned into sounds like it's heavily dependent on your ability to communicate and network. So that, I mean, how has networking played a sort of a crucial part for you then, and probably trying to upskill yourself to make this a success?
Networking really is everything. But it's I guess like it's more than just networking. It's I'd almost argue it's like it's the battle for attention. So let me just kind of unpack that slightly. Nowadays, I actually like it's almost table stakes to have, in the startup world anyway, to have like a good idea, a product, some customers, some traction, to have a good team, right? That looks good on paper. All of that is table stakes. There's lots of early stage companies that have those characteristics. But the battle that we are constantly trying to play is, if there are 100 of those companies and any individual only has the mental headspace to have 10 of those companies swirling around in their mind at any one time, whether they're an investor, whether they're a customer, then the battle is to be one of the 10. So how do we penetrate that headspace? How do we get in front of people? How it's for example, if you think about the way that you buy things, it's because it appears on Instagram, then it appears in your Google ads, and then you see it on TV, then your friends are talking about it, people are talking about it in WhatsApp. It's always there. That's the battle that today we're trying to play for anything. I didn't get that from medicine, by the way. That is something that you never have to play that game in medicine. The path is set for you. You just take the path. You know, you jump through the hoops, you take the path, and you'll never have to deal with this like weird battle that the outside world is playing.
Yeah, I mean, what you mentioned about medicine is probably that stereotypical the traditional route and role into a lot of things. But what you have found yourself in really is more of a non-traditional, and what you're describing there is what we as educators thought was very non-traditional. But I'm interested then, based on that, is how do you think educational institutions then could better prepare students for the non-traditional types of work that we're discussing?
It's a great question. So I think so at school I was spoon-fed, and I think anything that involves like spoon feeding, obviously it can get results, and it did get results for me and some of the other students, well, a lot of the other students. But what it didn't do was kind of inspire the art of the possible in us at all. And I never really felt like I could start from a blank canvas and would be encouraged to create something new, because, and there's a reason for that, because it's hard to assess. How can you allow, like, your students to start from a blank canvas and, give them a small amount of guidance and then try to assess them objectively? I get why that's a challenge, but actually allowing children the headspace to do that. I think if I had more headspace to do that when I was younger, then I think, it would have, I think I would have discovered that what is possible a lot earlier on.
Yeah, and that's the debate that's going on at the moment, isn't it? From our side, and so you see a little bit of it, obviously now being more involved in technology and the utilization of AI. A lot of the conversation taking place around that and to do with equality and equity, and globally, and whether exams, whether A levels, and the degree courses are still fit for purpose. And obviously with the profession that you started going down with medicine, it seems like it very much is fit for purpose. But given the idea that, maybe we want people to be lifelong learners like yourself who, have the capacity to, pivot, as it were, what do you think would need to come into play, or what would you like to see there, with this changing landscape and with the technologies coming in? What do you think would be important for educational institutes to try and integrate?
Yeah, so I mean, the easy answer here is to start to bring in some of the technology we're seeing as part of this massive paradigm shift, right, over the last couple of years. I think that's the easy answer, but I know it's a lot more nuanced than that. I think it's less about the technology, and just more about the freedom of giving people, it's almost like the freedom of which path you choose to get to the thing that you're trying to achieve. Okay, so an example here is the way that we were taught to achieve an A star at biology A level, right? I remember it was very, very regimented, and it was great because we got there in the end, right? But it was like, this is your ISA. We had like very few options to do like something for our ISA. We knew exactly the syllabus that, the syllabus was so rigid from what I remember. And it was kind of all written there for us. But also, like, there are people that are homeschooled and, go from 0 to A star 2, right? And I don't know if they follow the same process, but I bet it's pretty different. So I just feel like there are lots of ways to get to the desired outcome. And I think allowing people to have the freedom to choose their path, right, to get there is the key. Whether that involves using AI, whether that involves coming up with a Python script to extract data from like your textbook and presenting it to yourself. And I think we just need to give people the freedom, the freedom to actually, use technology to their advantage to get to where they want to be.
Oh, fantastic. And just to finish with then, I'm curious then, what is your favorite skill that you use now sort of on a daily basis that maybe actually you're not aware of that you're doing it, but just something that you've picked up, that you've developed that, allows you to be successful or, to be, or even productive, but just something that's there that you probably developed over time that, having thought about it, is like, actually, that's a really good characteristic. It's a really good skill to have.
Probably staying silent for as long as possible in big meetings and being the last person to speak. And the reason why, so I often find myself now in like, I think that maybe the latest example is like a board meeting, right? So I have to do board meetings now. How boring, right? Like, it's so boring. And now I'm accountable to investors and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, often, we'll enter the room, or maybe it's a virtual conversation, and my founders will start talking and the investors will start talking and everyone's talking and kind of sharing kind of status updates. And what I find is that it's interesting to allow people to talk and to really understand like what their agenda is for the day, like what's top of mind. And if you just sit back and just listen, then, and you're the final person to talk, by definition, you are the most well-informed person in the room before you've said a word. Right. And that has always treated me well. And I always try to do this whenever there's like any kind of meeting with more than 5 people in it. It always allows you to set, especially as somebody who's in a position of some kind of authority. I'm the CEO of the company. I kind of need to show some form of like leadership and wisdom, but either way, it doesn't really matter who you are. It really does allow you to set off on from a position of strength.
Yeah, it's I think we put it into the idea of active listening, and I think it's a great skill, and probably it's an absolutely great way to finish this conversation today. So, Sam, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about your education and your past, and obviously shaped you in terms of the person that you are today, and the wonderful things that you're achieving out there, even though it might be on a slightly different pathway. Doing some wonderful things. So again, thank you ever so much for your time. I really, really appreciate you kicking off this segment of Student Voice for us.
It's a pleasure, Alex. Such a pleasure to be here. And honestly, like when I think about my education, I don't think about my school. I don't think about like what I took at A levels. I think about the 3 or 4 teachers that like genuinely helped me and like paid attention to me. And that's why I came on this podcast, so.
I appreciate that. I really appreciate that, Sam. So thank you. And again, thank you ever so much. Absolutely wonderful talking with you.
Thanks, Alex.